Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inspired Change. So, the last podcast was about turning points, and I shared my personal story where I see one of my major turning points in my life that led me from essentially going on surfing trips to becoming a practicing psychologist. And I left you with the task to explore in yourself, in your own journey, what those turning points in your life might have been. So I want to carry on from there because I thought about it, and part of this was about also storytelling. I was telling my story, and as I keep bringing it up, we all in our lives have a story or more than one story to tell that are not just meaningful to ourselves, but actually have meaning to others, whether they're, a partner, our children. I'm forever really astonished when I work with teenagers how little a lot of the teenagers that I work with know about their family history and the stories within the family. I mean, it's even to the point sometimes where when I ask them about, so what does your dad do, they actually can't answer me, I think he does something in real estate or, so they're very vague often about these things. And I think that's a shame on a number of levels because our stories are about our existence, about our being as much as it is about doing. And it helps especially our kids to get a sense of themselves within the world through, at times, our own eyes. And so, one of the things that I want to do in this particular podcast is essentially to take it to another level. And the way that I want to do it is through Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. As a writer of non-fiction and fiction, I'm very aware of structure in storytelling, okay? And, I'm a big subscriber to, the three-act storytelling. The ancient Greeks used it, and it's been a tradition about that, but overlaid in the three acts is what Joseph Campbell talks about as the monomyth, and essentially the hero's journey. And what that looks like. And, anyone who's into watching movies and TV programs will probably be aware that most of the films have a particular structure and pace to them, both for the story arc but also for the character arc. Now, this is not just fiction. This is also something that I want to challenge you to see whether you can relate this to your own life, to your life story. A lot of you are probably interested in things like biographies and autobiographies. And, this is where we go to where reading is a fundamental aspect in human existence. And unfortunately, too many people that I see, especially teenagers, is they don't read the way that we used to. I got my first library card when I was about 7. And I was just an avid reader. You couldn't get me out of the library with a stack of books fast enough so I could get home and, settle down in my chair in my room and open the book, with this sense of anticipation and excitement about what is going to be revealed to me in this story along the way. Now, occasionally I'd be tempted to go to the last chapter and see what the outcome is, but I very quickly learnt that spoils it. If you're going to really get into the story, just take it one step at a time. Okay, so let me come back to essentially this issue about turning points. Okay, and so a good metaphor in this is that, it's that last page of a chapter where we're about to turn it and we're about to enter a new chapter in the story. So, turning points, and in my experience working with people, is most of us have some intuition or some sense that we're about to face a turning point. Now, sometimes that turning point is, in fact, a crisis and potentially painful, either physically or emotionally or socially or professionally. So, there's a question of what do I do with that? Now, a lot of us, particularly us as men, where we're trained often and socialised to ignore our intuition, our sense of things, we put it aside, we brush it. So, again, I'm often surprised by a lot of the guys that I work with who have run headlong into what I see as, a serious turning point in their life, and they just miss the lead up to it completely. And so they get caught off guard. And one of the consequences of that is that they enter the space between this chapter and the next chapter, which is an ending and a beginning, and there is a space between, with a sense of feeling lost, confused, a sense of trepidation. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's anxiety about, catastrophizing. Oh, what's about to come next? And in some instances, as I said, in our lives, when we're facing with, stressful, traumatic or painful experiences, we sort of got to brace ourselves in some way for that, right? So what is it that I'm ultimately doing in that space between the last page of that chapter and the beginning of the next chapter? And this is where I think that we need to reflect on our character. Are we subdued by fear and anxiety, or do we have the skills and resources to rally and feel the fear and do it anyway? It's a wonderful title to a book that was released, I think, in the 80s, and I can't remember the author now. But it was all about managing anxiety and to some degree fear. So some people at that point also then become defensive. I don't want to change. I just want things to be the same. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, we don't necessarily know whether that's true or not. Is that actual, or is that part of the story that I'm telling myself in order to feel better without necessarily doing a reality check on it? So, again, my challenge always to you as my listeners, and I really do appreciate you guys tuning in and paying attention. And at some point, I'd love to get some feedback from everybody out there about what it is that you've been able to take out of my podcasts. But this is where I go, it is time to raise your awareness through reflection, not being reactive, but focusing on being responsive to what the universe is putting in front of you. And some of it is obscure, and some of it is as blatant as a smack in the head. Now, unfortunately, sometimes we need that smack in the head in order to wake up. It's a shame, but I've had experiences where, I've literally sort of copped one to the chin and gone, okay, get back up, dust yourself off, and learn from this. Don't fight it. As I've said in other podcasts, one of the sort of things that I struggled with was that meme about, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But it's true. It's, one of the aspects to being resilient. So, in a quick summary, the turning point we usually have a sense of something about to arise. It comes up. There's a space in between, and the next step in our lives unfolds. Now, how that unfolds ultimately is also dependent on what is it that I can do with it. So let me come back to the hero's journey and this idea that Joseph Campbell put forward. And in many respects, in the short version is that Campbell talks about 3 basic stages in the hero's journey. But he then expands it to 17 steps of the monomyth that are grouped into these 3 main categories. So the first step is the departure. In other words, this is where our hero, i.e. I, am living in my so-called ordinary world. And suddenly I get this call to adventure. Now, usually in most stories, the hero is really ambivalent about following that particular call to adventure. And in storytelling and in the model of the hero's journey, that's called the refusal of the call. But then, out of the blue, sometimes not so much out of the blue, the hero is helped by a mentor who counsels him and convinces him to follow the call. Okay, so I want you to think about that. So 2 levels of thinking and reflecting about that is 1, grab your favourite movie, okay? Watch it and think about in the first act where this is going on. What's going on there? Who's who and what are they up to? What's the theme here? Now, the second part of the hero's journey, the second category is the initiation. And this is where the hero enters the special world, where he begins to face a series of tasks until he reaches the climax of the story, the pinnacle in this story arc. It could be an obstacle or it could be an enemy. Okay? And in this context, the hero's got to put into practice everything he's learnt, because he's got to overcome that obstacle or that foe. Now, Campbell also at that point talks about the hero getting a prize out of that. You know, some physical token or something that resembles good old-fashioned values, or sometimes both. Okay, again, reflect on this. This is often in Act 2. Now, the next category is the return, where I, as the hero, am ready to come back into my world, and I've got to leave the special world. Now, once back in the ordinary world, there's a personal change, a metamorphosis into understanding how my adventure has changed me. What is it that has woken me up? So, in order to help this along a little bit and get you to really reflect both on yourself, but also when you're watching and immersing yourself in stories, and I want to encourage you to do this because it also helps, if you're a parent, make up stories to tell your children, whether they're 3 years old or 7 or sometimes 13. You know, we often disengage from teenagers because we get this sense they don't really want to know us. Well, that's not entirely true. A lot of them are craving to get to know us as their parent better. But we generally focus only on getting them to do the right things. Have you done your homework? Have you cleaned your room? You know, you're not doing drugs, are you? Or, you know, have you raided the liquor cabinet? We become this sort of overlord. And, you know, any self-respecting teenager is going to go, I don't want to put up with this. I don't want to experience that. So they try to keep their distance from us. And it's a very sad aspect of what I see often in amongst teenagers. Not all, but some, certainly. So one of the films that had a massive impact on me was Star Wars. I remember sitting in the theatre and watching this thing and just being totally blown out by the visual effects and the storyline and the setting. So if I walk through the hero's journey in Star Wars, let's start with Luke's ordinary world. So here he is. He's living on Tatooine with his aunt and uncle, and it's a farm. Life is pretty boring. Luke's restless, and he likes basically to stare at the sunset and dreams of getting off this rock. Now, not too far into the story, there's the call to adventure, where R2-D2 plays Luke a message of distress from Princess Leia, who needs someone to transport the droid to Alderaan. Yeah, so far so good. Now here comes the refusal of the call. Luke isn't exactly enamoured about the idea of leaving his home planet and getting into trouble with his uncle and go on a wild goose chase somewhere in the galaxy. So, he's a reluctant hero here at this point. In steps Obi-Wan Kenobi, who convinces Luke to follow his heart. And he does that by showing Luke his father's lightsaber. Now, at that point, Luke crosses over. And Luke and Obi-Wan leave Mos Eisley for Alderaan. So far, so good. We're on an adventure. Now comes the ordeal. Leia's rescue from the Death Star, and later, Luke uses the Force to destroy the Death Star. There's that wonderful scene of him flying like in canyons on a speeder, except he's in a X-wing. And the Death Star blows up in this magnificent fireworks. And then we get to see Luke return. Luke joins the rebels and at that point decides to become a Jedi. And this is a really fantastic example. And I'm going to be a little benign narcissist here and talk about and reflect back to my own journey. I was a bit lost. I was like Luke, being bored in the bank. I didn't know what to do. I had no path forward that excited me, that tuned me in. And that one call, and, I wouldn't have necessarily called my friend a mentor, but he took me to that place where I felt that call to adventure, right? I knew suddenly that surfing trips wasn't really something that was going to sustain my whole life. I needed to have a calling, and that to me came out of that lecture, and I understood that I wanted to do psychology, and I wanted to be a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and I wanted to work with people. I wanted to make a difference. But at the same time, I looked at this, and my wobbly moment was I didn't have an entrance into university unless I waited another 6 or 7 years, or I did 2 years in 1 year and sweat blood. And it took me a little bit of time to go, do I really want to do this? Is it worth the effort in a way? It might be easier just to trot along and do what I'm doing and stay in the bank, and maybe with a bit of luck I'll rise through the ranks there. But the call was too strong. The passion had been triggered, and I couldn't say no. And at that point, ironically, some of what I unkindly refer to as some antagonists in my life gave me the burn in the belly to pursue the call and cross the threshold. So think about this again in your own lives, because we all face turning points all the time. And, it is our story. It is a story to share. When I went to the story room, it was suddenly quite emotional for me to put in 8 minutes across my turning point, what led up to it. And it was a long lead up in a way. It was from being a child to being that 19 and a half year old who was going to step into the adult world for real. Not in fantasy way, but for real. And I've shared that story with others. And it's been for myself and for them, often a meaningful narrative to understand. And so, again, I'm going to reach out to you and think about this, because within that context, we get to understand our character. And once we understand our character better and we're steadfast in that noble pursuit, we are going to make a difference in this world, not just to ourselves, but also to those around us that we love, and often to those who, are on the periphery. It's amazing how many people will see us move through the world. We don't know them, but they see something in us that could be inspiring. And with that, I'm going to leave it with you. So hopefully I'm inspiring change in you, and share the experience. Share it with your partner, share it with your kids, share it with your mates, but share it. Until the next time, signing off. Look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at noirtainment, noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.